How do we set effective boundaries for ourselves? I've done a couple videos in the past around how boundaries can help us build better relationships. I've mentioned how boundaries are important in things like moving out of codependence and things like that. But today I actually want to talk about how do we set boundaries, okay? And it may seem really obvious, but there's a lot of things, little nuances that we need to look at in order to be sure that we're setting effective boundaries and holding effective boundaries. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I invite you to subscribe. This channel is all about empowering women to move beyond the barriers that keep them from the life they envision for themselves, the life that they know is possible, to start feeling empowered. And I'm Kim Marie. I am a life and leadership coach, and I love doing this work and bringing all kinds of practical tips and even bordering on the realm of practical spirituality. So today is all about boundaries. How do we set them? The first thing we need to know is how to set the clear limits that we have. That's really what boundaries are. Okay, I always say that the river needs the riverbanks, all right? So life itself, our projects, our activities, our creative expression, our work, everything has to flow through something, and that's where the boundaries come in. You know, what kind of job are you willing and not willing to take? What kind of partner are you willing and not willing to engage with? What kinds of conversations do you want to participate in or not participate in? How do you want to be spoken to? How do you want to be treated, right? What are you willing to do and not do in your life? And those are the containers. That's like the riverbanks through which our life can flow. And that doesn't mean that those boundaries can't change over time, right? Our personal limits may change, right? There was a time when I enjoyed going to carnivals and amusement park rides, you know, like roller coasters and thrill rides. And now I have zero interest in it, right? My boundary has changed. My limit has maybe narrowed in that department, but I have expanded limits in other areas, things that I'm now willing to do that I would never have been willing to do before. So noticing your own limits is super, super important in order to set boundaries. And here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Sometimes we have to go ahead and try things without having boundaries, right? And that can be a little bit scary, because if we try something and find out later that it's kind of dangerous, maybe we even get hurt emotionally, physically, mentally, etc., or we, try something and we later feel like, God, why did I waste my time doing that? It can feel very frustrating. And I think this is where many of us get tripped up, because we aren't willing to take the time to really pause and determine what our limits are. We don't always have to experiment with things to determine our limits, right? We can just know that certain things are not for us, right? We don't feel right about it. It doesn't align with us. A gut feeling tells us no. That is absolutely valid. Just because one doesn't always have experience with something doesn't mean that it's not something they can have a gut feeling about. And similarly, on the flip side, it's really important to ask yourself, well, am I calling that a gut feeling because I just don't want to try something? And, I'm being a little judgmental or setting a limit for myself that doesn't allow me to step out of my comfort zone because I think I know the way it'll be, but I don't really know because I have no experience with it. It's a dance, right? If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I am so much about helping us to find the middle way. And this is the middle way, navigating extremes, right? Dancing between the too little and the too much, which I talk about in many of my videos. And if you haven't downloaded my balance and empowerment cards, that is a great tool for you to learn to navigate these extremes, to determine what are the extremes, in what areas are you moving toward the too little or the too much for what you need in your life. So there's a link in the description. Be sure to download those if you have not already. They're super, super helpful and a powerful tool. So this idea of understanding and knowing and setting our limits is the first step in setting effective boundaries. Now, the second piece that we want to look at is articulating those boundaries. Once we've gotten a sense, whether it's through experience or our gut feeling, or just simply kind of noticing and paying attention and engaging what we're comfortable with right now in this moment, then we have to be able to articulate it. And when I say articulate it, I mean express what it is, put it into words. And that could be written or spoken. I highly encourage you to think about, like, maybe you are wanting to be on a dating site, okay? Or maybe you are wanting to apply for a job. Or maybe there's an activity that you're considering doing, some kind of new group that you're thinking about joining. Go ahead and write down what you feel is and is not acceptable to you. The kinds of things that you know are going to be like, your limit, your boundary. Maybe you know that you couldn't date a vegan, or the opposite, you couldn't date a carnivore, right? Or maybe you know that you don't want a job that requires you to work with, I don't know, toxic chemicals, but you know that you absolutely must have a job where you get to talk to people and engage with others and be part of a team. Whatever those things are, those become your boundaries, right? They become the limits of what you're willing and not willing to accept. And by writing those down, you really begin to form clear pictures of what that might look like, right? And it can be really helpful also in determining what you want for yourself in your life by paying attention to your boundaries. And then, of course, even speaking them, being able to express them. Maybe you start out by just telling a friend, if I go on this dating site, this is what I know I will or won't accept in a potential partner before I decide to go on a date with someone, right? You can express it and be able to speak it, because when you know that you can articulate it through the written or spoken word, then you know that you're getting close to having those clear boundaries, all right? Which brings me to the next piece, which is communicating your boundaries, all right? It's really important to remember to communicate what it is that you will and will not do, right? And you have to be able to stand in those boundaries. So by having clear limits, a clear expression of it, you're going to be able to communicate it when the need comes up. I'm very clear that I don't drink alcohol or use substances. I don't even drink coffee. And so, it's really easy for me. If someone offers me a cup of coffee at their house or offers me a drink, I say, no, thank you, right? It's just so easy. And sometimes you might have to repeat yourself. Sometimes you have people that are, oh, come on, just have a drink, or, oh, come on, join me in a cup of coffee. No, thank you, I'll have tea, right? You may have to repeat yourself. You may have to re-express, because sometimes people feel the need to be joined in whatever their choice is for their own validation, but that's not your responsibility. When you have those clear boundaries, you're able to simply say, yes, please, no, thank you, and leave it at that. You don't have to explain yourself, you don't have to justify it, you don't have to defend yourself, nothing of the kind. You simply know and you communicate it. You know what you will and won't accept. That's not acceptable here. And this works amazingly well with children. I love the phrase, you may, no matter whether you want them to do something or not do something, right? Let's say they're climbing up on the countertop. You may get down, right? That's a simple phrase. Or you may get up to the table when you want them to come to the table to have dinner. You may put away your toys. It's a permissive thing, as opposed to constantly saying, you can't do this, don't do that, you're doing this wrong, or fighting with them. There's an aspect of very clear boundaries allows you to say, this is acceptable, this is not. And it's so matter of fact that you rarely get challenged on it. So it's really important to have that awareness of your limits, be able to articulate it, and then communicate it. So once you have been aware of your limits, you've articulated, you've communicated, you also want to be able to recognize the boundaries, okay? This may seem kind of obvious. Well, if I've articulated and communicated, don't I already recognize them? But you'd be surprised how many of us don't recognize when we're crossing a boundary of our own that we've set for ourselves, or we're letting someone else cross a boundary that we've set. And we kind of get soft on ourselves and we say, okay, well, maybe just this time. If you are not clear on when you will and won't adjust those boundaries, and then you just let it happen willy-nilly, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. You need to recognize when you will and when you won't compromise those boundaries. Boundaries are not something that have to be absolutely fixed, right? Even the river sometimes starts to carve out a slightly different path depending on what's happening in the river, right? If the storm is raging, it's going to carve out a wider path, and sometimes maybe the river starts drying up and it's it's kind of contracting a bit. Life is the same for us, right? So you want to recognize where the boundaries are, when you're willing to shift them, when you're not, and even continue to reset them and reassess them over time in your life. Again, knowing that boundaries will change with time. So you want to recognize them. Otherwise, you may find that people are taking advantage of you, or you're feeling frustrated and not seen. And that's probably because you're not holding firm to the boundaries or even seeing the ways in which you're not doing that. And that goes to that place of being willing to adjust them as needed, right? Maybe you're single now and then you end up in a partnership, a relationship with someone, and those boundaries will change a little bit because you start to compromise. You want to adjust. They'll adjust a little bit of their boundaries. You'll adjust a little bit of your boundaries. Compromise is part of every relationship, as long as we're not compromising who we are and some of the non-negotiables about what really is and isn't okay with us, right? And what we think is non-negotiable now may totally change. Using the example I gave before, maybe you don't think you'd ever want to live with a vegan or ever want to live with a carnivore. But the reality is that may be because you have some story in your head that says we have to eat every single meal together and eat the same thing. When in reality, maybe the way that you enjoy each other and you really have the most fun together is doing activities and creative projects together and not centered around mealtime, right? And you don't need to eat the same things. Or maybe you can sit down and eat a meal together, but they prepare their food, you prepare your food, and it's perfectly acceptable. That may change, right? We can change the way we see things and expand and contract our boundaries as needed. So I hope that helps. I think those are some really powerful ways in which to make sure that we set clear boundaries, honor the clear boundaries, and communicate those clear boundaries and adjust them over time. So if you have any questions about boundaries, I'd love to hear them. If you have an example of maybe a boundary you set that was crossed and you're wondering, how do I do better at setting clearer boundaries? Or maybe you have a tool that you've used to set clear boundaries that's really helped you. Leave a note in the comments. I'd love to have the conversation going. I absolutely love engagement. Thank you to those of you who are engaging and commenting on my videos. I absolutely love seeing that. It warms my heart. And I look forward to seeing what you have to say and getting the conversation going. Until next time.